Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a series of podcasts and videos dedicated to training the next generation of health IT leaders. Today, we're going to cover a ton of stories in a very short period of time. I'm looking forward to it. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Want to start your health IT project on the right track? Want to turn around a failing project? Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. Our guest today is the original recovering healthcare CIO and indie consultant, Drex DeFord. Good morning, Drex, and welcome to the show.
How you doing? Thanks for having me. It's always fun to hang out with you and kind of go through the news of the day.
Yeah, it is going to be fun and fast and furious. You're like one of my go-to people for talking about the Silicon Valley, Seattle-based ventures and what it means for healthcare. I mean, the thing I love about it is you live in that world, you live in the startup world, and you have the healthcare CIO background, so you're able to translate it for us, which is great. But
the luckiest guy on the planet.
Before we get there, though, the softball question, and which I always throw out is there anything you're working on that you're excited about and that you want to share or talk about?
Man, is there something that I'm excited about? You know, I mean, I'm always excited about everything.
NDA that you can talk about.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's part of the challenge for me. I'm always excited about everything that I work on, and I am lucky enough, knock on wood, that I kind of continue to be in this place where I get to work on the things I want to work on, and I don't work on the things I don't want to work on. So I like all the stuff I do. I have a lot of companies. Not a lot. I have a handful of companies under retainer. I do some special project work. Right now I'm doing work with a health system that's going through a whole process of an IT review, but a lot of it is focused on governance and innovation center development and all of that. And that's a lot of fun. It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of that innovation center work. I saw Children's LA is doing, just kicked off their stuff around pediatrics and really gamification of healthcare. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's you know, the thing I would probably say about innovation centers in healthcare is that my experience so far is that when you've seen one, you've seen one. They're all done differently. They all have different goals and different intentions in what they're trying to do. And so it's a very interesting, broad design of innovation centers in healthcare.
Well, that's what I liked about Children's LA focusing in on gamification, because by doing that, they can really become the center that you go to for the gamification of health for children. And I'm sure some other children's hospital are dabbling in it, but when you try to be too broad, a lot of times you don't attract the right resources and the right energy around it. So I like that focus. I don't know. Do you recommend that innovation centers try to focus in a little bit more, or do you go a broad route?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of it depends on what do they want to try to get out of the innovation center. So there are places like Cedars-Sinai's Healthcare Accelerator that actually has a regular rotation of early stage company sort of classes that come through every 10 weeks or 12 weeks. And they're really looking for early stage companies who have really great ideas that they can use to help solve problems at Cedars-Sinai. But then you have other organizations that really are just getting started and trying to get their legs and figure out where they're going. And I think you're exactly right. Like a startup company or like any company, if you focus too broadly, you definitely lose momentum. So I love that CHLA is definitely going down this path of we're going to focus on this and we're going to get really good at this. And that may turn into a whole bunch of different things, including a new company for them or just having an area of expertise that no one else has. But that's good. If you only have limited resources, focus is always important, no matter what your organization is.
All right. So I had your friend Wes Wright on the show, and I noticed you didn't make fun of him on the LinkedIn post the way he made fun of you on the LinkedIn post for bobbing your head just like that when I'm talking. So just be careful as we start going back and forth here. Don't give Wes any ammunition to come at you. All right,
Wes, it doesn't matter. I mean, we've known each other since we were young captains in the Air Force. And so, yeah, he has so many ticks and quirks that I can make fun of that I just don't. And then he picks on me for all my weird
Well,
I do get into this though sometimes when somebody's like going the right direction. I'm like, yeah,
keep going. It's good. All right. Well, let's get to rapid fire here. So, JP Morgan, Amazon, Berkshire has finally named their joint venture. So they have named it Haven.
Right.
It's the venture's led by Dr. Atul Gawande, hired in June. Let me see. Here's another. Essentially, here's the quote. We want to change the way people experience healthcare so that it is simpler, better, and lower cost, Gawande said in a statement. We'll start small, learn from the experience of patients, and continue to expand to meet their needs. And we've talked, not you and I specifically, but we've talked on the show about this before, that I believe he was a great hire for this. He is very pragmatic. He will start small. He is very analytical. So he will look at all sorts of numbers before he even determines what path they will go down. And I think by hiring him into this role, they've really increased their odds of doing something that's going to be pretty transformative. I think everybody just assumed these three companies would come together and do something transformative, but that's not always the case. We've seen large companies do goofy things in healthcare before. But I think by putting him in place, they've really increased their odds. So what's your thoughts on the name? What's your thoughts on where this is at or where it's going?
So what's the name of the original? What did we used to call it? JP Morgan, Amazon, Chase. I guess my initial reaction is, thank God we don't have to say that anymore.
I know. Now we can just say Haven.
We can just say Haven.
How long will people take before we have to say, Haven, JP Morgan, Amazon, Berkshire's?
Right. Maybe they've even made it more complicated in the near term. I'm with you. I think Atul Gawande was a great choice to lead the organization. If all the things that he's written and all the things that you see him when you see him present or see him talk in the past, even before joining the company, very practically oriented, very good, I think, solid stuff. And so it's been a year, and all we have so far is Haven. Now, I'm sure there's been a lot of work that has gone on in the background, and I'm sure ultimately they will wind up generating things, I think, a piece at a time, that ultimately we'll figure out they were actually building a great big jigsaw puzzle, a piece at a time. But I'm looking forward to the first pieces coming out, because I think better, faster, cheaper, safer, easier access healthcare for patients and families is absolutely what we're all after. And it's definitely what they're after.
Sure. So, but if you're a CEO, I'm going to promote you. So if you're a CEO in Seattle, you're talking a lot of employees in Seattle, or New York City, a lot of employees in New York City, and probably some other cities if I really thought about it. But those two cities specifically, if you're a CEO of a health system there, what would you be doing today? Are you concerned that this might change the patterns of people seeking health?
I think that, as an employer, you're probably continue to be so wrapped around the axle with the current arrangements that you have, and trying to manage healthcare costs, working with whoever your third party, your provider is, your insurance company, your, whatever arrangement you've created as an employer, that you're looking, I think, at Haven and saying, I hope they come up with something, but I don't know that as an employer, you're probably spending a huge amount of time thinking about what's coming from Haven. I think they're probably hopeful that something great is going to come out, and ultimately it's going to impact the cost that they have to pay to provide healthcare to their employees. I just don't know if they've spent a lot of time really thinking about the details of what that might be.
If I'm
spent a lot of time guessing.
Yeah. So if I'm a CEO in New York, or if I'm I guess Providence in Seattle, or UW in Seattle, I'm putting a team together. I'm calling them up. I'm saying, Dr. Gawande, I'd love to work with you. I'm putting a team together. I'm saying, look, they're dedicated to you, and we're gonna come up with a model that works specifically for your program, that helps your people live healthier lives, that keeps them healthy and vibrant and at work, I guess, is what we're looking for. And not to be too cynical about it, but essentially it is an employer program. And really, if you're able to do that, what you cut out is the insurance carrier. You don't cut out the health system. You don't change the health system. But whoever's able to partner with them, that's an awful lot of people. There's an awful a lot of lives there. So I'd be trying to figure out how to sort of horn in is what I'd be doing.
I think you're right. I sort of took it from your question from the perspective of a large employer in Seattle and not necessarily the health systems, but you're right. If I was the health systems, I would definitely be trying to figure out how do I get in that game early and make sure that I'm a part of that and not somebody who gets left out. Now, if you're a children's hospital, for example, you're Switzerland in all situations. And so you've got unique, interesting specialty care that can only be provided by that organization. Still, you need to get involved in the game early. I think that makes a big difference and proves that you really want to save dollars and make healthcare more cost effective for patients and families and employers.
This is going to be the hard thing about going rapid fire. I want to follow up on that. But if I follow up, then you're going to follow up. So next story, assessing EHR use during hospital morning rounds. So there was a study. I actually pulled this from your feed. So there was a study that was done, and they mixed method of collecting information. And what they determined was that across the analysis was that as people are rounding, that these are the three things they found. High degree of variance in the ways teams use EHRs during morning rounds. Number two was pervasive use of workarounds at critical points of care. Third thing was EHRs are not used for information sharing and frequently impede intra-care team communication. And a fourth one, system design and hospital room settings do not adequately support care team workflow. So interesting findings. To be honest with you, none of those findings really surprised me. So, what can we be doing? What are we doing? What can we be doing to address this specifically, do you think?
I thought the same thing when I read the article. I don't know that any of those things surprise me. I think the real sort of takeaway in that is our inability in healthcare to yet create clinical standard work around the use of the electronic health record. So we've, to sort of turn a phrase, we've kind of paved a cow path instead of sort of saying we're going to do everything a different way. So now that we're using EHRs, and that means we're going to change the way we do morning rounds so that we can integrate the EHR more effectively and not do workarounds. That creates a whole group of risk in and of itself for patients and families. And none of us really want that. But I think we've still sort of got this weird situation where we have clinicians and others who are unwilling to change and unlearn the habits that they already have about how they do morning rounds and other clinical provision of care too. But in this instance, particularly around morning rounds, they're unwilling to sort of change their ways of doing it to integrate the EHR more effectively. And then I think the other part of that is sometimes the EHR doesn't work very well to be able to facilitate the work that they're trying to do too. So it's really sort of two different pieces of this. One is a management engineering effort to make sure that we're using the EHR as much as we can in the workflow and that the workflow has been modified to adapt to the EHR. And the other one is changing the EHR and doing the informatics stuff that we need to do to make sure that the right data is available when it needs to be used in morning rounds.
Yeah, this is one of those things that it really showcases the leadership of the health system, because this is not just it's a team sport, like you said. It's not just IT. It's it's standardizing clinical workflows, it's standardizing clinical terminologies, practices, data sharing. It's all those things. It's embedding IT into those rounds. And a couple of CIOs have talked about embedding analytics in those rounds, but also embedding workflow people in those rounds so that they're constantly adapting the EHR and identifying those workarounds that could lead to care gaps, because they are potential care gaps, and these are the kind of things we're trying to eliminate. So it's complex. You can always tell the really well-run healthcare organizations, because you really have to fire. If you're firing on two of those four cylinders, it shows.
Yeah. And mistakes happen and other challenges occur. I mean, I think one of the best things I ever did as a CIO was the least technology thing I ever did as a CIO. And that is, we had a group of really amazing workflow specialists that were part of our team and really spent all their time in the field figuring out how to help clinicians learn how to change their workflow to use the tool more effectively. But at the same time, they brought back the information that they needed to tell the technologist about how to adjust the tool to take better advantage of the workflow. And, it's a people process technology thing, as we've said a million times. If they all work together, it's a beautiful thing. And if you just try to pull on one handle really, really hard, it just doesn't work right.
Yeah. And I'll take the last word on this, which is I tell CIOs all the time on this one, if you're not doing this well, your clinicians are going to be cynical. And then when you start talking about digital and transformation, they're just going to look at you like, are you kidding me? You didn't do the last one well.
Right.
And this is like, this is like we used to say the data center has to always be on every time they turn on the computer. I mean, that's what this is now. Your workflow has to work for people. You have to be constantly improving it, making them more efficient. This is a story I do want to get your take on. I mean, you're right in their backyard, and I guess we're visiting Amazon again. AWS and Beth Israel Deaconess have done Amazon has given Beth Israel a $2 million investment / grant to work with them on artificial intelligence and where it can be used in the hospital to provide more efficiency. This is really interesting. I'm not even sure what question I want to ask here, other than is this the new norm? Are we going to see these kinds of plays as these players? They have these great tools. They're trying to figure out what to do with them. Are we going to see more of this?
I think companies like Amazon have a lot. There's a lot of profit there, right? And there's the potential for more profit. And they're really in a great situation to be able to sit down with an organization that they consider cutting edge, like Beth Israel Lahey, and sort of create this kind of a program for them. And really this kind of runs the gauntlet of innovation, or the not the gauntlet, but the, I guess, spectrum of innovation. From one end, you probably have Beth Israel Lahey saying stuff like, these are my requirements. These are chronic problems that I have that I think AI or other AWS capabilities might be able to help me with. Can you help me figure out how to solve that problem? And on the other end, really is Amazon saying, we have some super cool tools that do really interesting things, but we're trying to figure out how they might actually help you in healthcare. And then there's a spectrum in between there where there's lots of overlap. So if they work really well together, I think they spend the energy and the resources effectively, they may be able to come out of this with some pretty good products. So from the Amazon perspective, do we develop something that other healthcare systems can use, and then we can sell that? Yep. And on the Beth Israel Lahey side, they get to solve problems earlier than other people are able to solve them in a market that is super competitive and has already sort of, in many ways, gone across the bridge from fee-for-service to value-based care. That Massachusetts market is really one of the leaders in the country in this. So they're ahead of the game already.
Yep. I think this is one of the benefits of John Halapka going into the innovation role,
right,
and leaving the information role to the side. It gives him more time to focus. And his data is already out on AWS, so they were an obvious partner with these guys. I do. Since we're talking about AI, I want to touch on one of your former colleagues. So Eric Topol's coming out with a new book, Deep Medicine: How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Healthcare Human Again. And people keep talking about AI is the buzzword. Well, I was on a panel once, and I was just Aaron Levy asked me. He goes, what's a buzzword that you hate? And I said, there isn't a single buzzword I hate, because they're a buzzword for a reason. And the reason is because everyone's talking about them. So why is everyone talking about artificial intelligence? And Eric Topol says these things. Artificial intelligence is the single most important opportunity to address all the major things wrong with healthcare today. According to Eric Topol, a world-renowned cardiologist, geneticist, digital medicine researcher, and author. He's not the only one who said that this week. You had Ed Marks did a interview of Toby Cosgrove, and he said the exact same thing. Ed said, hey, what's the number one thing you think is going to really impact healthcare? And he said, artificial intelligence, hands down, is going to change the industry. And so you have, and he's not, I mean, Eric might be, you could point at him and say, he looks at a lot of forward thinking things, but Toby Cosgrove is a pretty pragmatic, level-headed guy who's saying, hey, I'm spending some time in Silicon Valley. I'm seeing these things. This is the real deal. This is really going to transform things. So what's been your take so far? What are you seeing, or what's your feeling on this?
I'm a big fan of topals, and the more that I look at early stage companies and look at the artificial intelligence work they're doing, which there's sort of a whole spectrum of conversations around artificial intelligence. That's another whole part of this, is that what they're really doing at this point is machine learning and deep learning, so sort of a subset of what we think of as the larger AI concept or idea.
And NLP, which has been around for a while.
NLP, absolutely. And so unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I think AI is being talked about sort of in this big AI will solve world hunger kind of perspective. But I think it's more the concepts of NLP and deep learning and machine learning, that there are lots of individual examples that I'm sure are going to be in Dr. Topol's book, where AI can make a difference, or the components of AI can make a difference, can sort of change the game, create an augmented support for clinicians and business operators and others that help them work on the really, really hard things and help them move faster on the things that are more routine, all the way through offloading complete pieces of work to an AI or a support system that is a component of AI. And I think we're going to get there. I mean, I think this is just a little bit of progress at a time. And, I read something the other day that says every time we get to something that is artificial intelligence, we don't call it artificial intelligence anymore. We call it Siri, or we call it, something else. We never actually get to AI. And I think I'm probably okay with that. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that can happen in little practical pockets that can make us better in healthcare. What do you think about it?
Well, there's a couple things he said in this. There's a Forbes article. Actually, it's a promo piece for the NVIDIA conference, which he's speaking at. But he does talk about the book. He said the first thing he said, I think, which I think we all agree on at this point, is that the data needs to be owned by the individual. And actually, he makes an interesting point, which I hadn't really articulated before, which was it's better for the individual to own the data from a security standpoint. Because if you have 5 million patients with data, it's a lot harder to get at it than if you have a single repository with 5 million patients in it. A hacker gets in and they're in, they have 5 million patients. And so he's talking about the attack vectors, which was an interesting way of looking at. The second thing he goes is the same thing you're saying, which is he shares the concerns, about AI, because a lot of it has been long on promise and short on implementation and validation, which is true. But he also follows that up by saying this is a great opportunity for people to work together to get that validation and implementation. And and the last point he makes, which is more of a policy thing, he said, the UK is way ahead of the US. And the reason is because not only have they engaged in planning, but also because they are already starting implementation on those ideas in the real world. And he said the U.S. has no AI healthcare strategy, and there hasn't been any national planning at this point, and it really shows. And it's interesting because, when we think AI, we think Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and we think those big players, and NVIDIA and others, IBM, but we don't think U.S. policy. We don't think people coming together and helping us to put together a track, but that's happening in China. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in these other countries. They're laying the foundation to really leapfrog the US if we don't get that foundation in place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you do look at it as sort of like a national policy, where do you want to put the time and the effort and the energy, research dollars, all those kinds of things into a program, into an AI program? I think our tendency here seems to be more leave it to the free market, let the free market sort it out, as opposed to China or other countries who are much more focused on these are the things we want to solve today. This is the place we want to go. And kind of back to our earlier conversation about when you have limited resources, you need to focus. I think that's something that we have a problem with focus, and a lot of that is just built around the way the economics of our country work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what it looks like, but at this point, we can look at those other countries to see what they're putting in place. The last, we're going to go over time. I apologize, but
that's okay.
The last story, I just want to point it out because there's been a lot of talk about transparency, and there was a story about St. Luke's revenue cycle and how they've gone about the whole transparency thing. Because they got ahead of it in October of 2015. They put out a pricing tool. And with that pricing tool, you get these bundles. And with these bundles, they actually give you the ability to prepay. And if you prepay, there's a discount off the services. And, you and I were talking earlier of the charge master. I mean, putting the charge master out on the website it's the silliest thing. I mean, I was in healthcare. I had to reconcile a whole bunch of charge masters as part of a team. And I can honestly tell you, it really does take a team of experts to figure out the charge master. How is putting the charge master out on a website transparency in terms of pricing?
That is a great question.
I don't know. That was more of a diatribe than anything. But what do you
have an answer to that?
Do you think there's more health systems going to take this? I mean, I love the fact that St. Luke's digitized this whole process, and their patients now have the ability to get transparency on their app. I mean, on their mobile app. Do you think that's going to be more the norm? Do you think we'll see that?
I think it's great, and I hope it does become more of the norm. It would be nice to know what things cost before you went in for them. They're taking the things that are probably the easiest to understand, the easiest math to do. I know you need 2 of these kinds of x-rays, and I know you need this kind of surgery, and it usually takes about this long, and uses this many instruments and whatever. I think they talk about rotator cuff in there as being one of the surgeries. Yeah. But if you can do the math and kind of figure that out and kind of be able to stick to that, because you've got good standard clinical work and all your surgeons do this work in exactly the same way, and you really know how much it's going to cost, then, I mean, those are great. And those are definitely the places to start. A lot of this is just about getting started. Do something. You don't have to solve all the problems with the move to value-based care. Just do something, just start somewhere. And that's what they've done. And I think that when you put enough of these things together, you're going to wind up with some really great relationships with maybe Haven or others, right? To take advantage of work that you're doing ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, it's somebody, a CIO asked me, he said, you tell me who's the player in the market who's doing the best in terms of digital. I struggled. I mean, I really struggled to come up with it. But when I had some time to sit back and think about it, it's like, everybody has done something, right? They've identified some experience they want to fine tune. They've identified one thing. And so this is a great example. I wouldn't necessarily point at St. Luke's and say they are the digital front runner, but they've taken this one thing and they're potentially leading the industry in terms of how they're addressing it. And I think we're seeing that all over the place. You have like somebody has figured out, expectant mothers, and somebody's figured out how to do a check-in process. Just everybody's doing something a little bit, and it's almost the health system that's able to aggregate all those things and reduce the friction is probably the one you're going to look at and say, they got it. They figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's focus. So deciding what you need to work on and working on that. And then the second part of it really is, I guess, ego, or organizations that have a lack of ego that are willing to say, I don't have to invent all this crap here. I actually can learn from other people. And so the third part of that really is plagiarism, right? Which is the most sincere form of flattery. So being able to go to all those other places where all this other work has been done and saying, how do I integrate that into a single digital strategy that supports where I want my organization to go? And what creates better, faster, cheaper, safer, easier access care for patients and families. And that'll be the winner. Those will be the guys who will be acquiring everybody else.
Drex, I had 15 more stories we were going to talk about, but we're out of time. So
Yeah, thank you.
I do want to thank you for coming on the show. Always appreciate it. I assume people can follow you on LinkedIn. They can follow you on Twitter as well.
Absolutely. At Drex DeFord.
At DrexFord. Great. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out the website at thisweekinhealthit.com or the YouTube channel at thisweekinhealthit.com/video. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.